You ever wonder what it feels like to stand in court and feel nothing? To watch a judge speak your sentence, to hear families weep and not blink? Some people can. They call it evil. Criminologists call it psychopathy. Tonight, we're leaving the crime scene behind. We're walking into the psychology and the science that tries to understand what most of us can't. We'll hear how the RCMP connects patterns across hundreds of cases, how scientists study the criminal brain, and how sometimes the answers are darker than the crimes themselves. This is Northern Dark, and today we are looking inside the mind of a killer, Canada's hidden criminology. It's June 2023. Inside Millhaven Institution, one of Canada's highest security prisons, a small hearing room hums with low conversation. Paul Bernardo, one of the country's most infamous offenders, sits before the Parole Board of Canada. He's serving life sentences for the murders of teenagers Kristen French and Leslie Mahaffey, and for numerous sexual assaults that terrorized Ontario in the early 1990s. Journalists in the room describe the same thing. The smile, calm, detached, no remorse, no emotion. The board's written decision that year is blunt. Bernardo continues to present as manipulative, narcissistic, and lacking insight into the harm he caused. They ruled his risk to the public as high and unmanageable. But behind that decision lies a question psychologists have wrestled with for decades. Why do some people feel nothing? In the 1970s, Vancouver psychologist Dr. Robert Hare began studying violent offenders at the Old British Columbia Penitentiary. His research led to the psychopathy checklist, now used worldwide by forensic psychiatrists and parole boards. Hare describes psychopathy not as insanity, but as emotional color blindness. The part of the brain that lights up with empathy or guilt in most of us stays silent. A psychopath can mimic emotion, tears, and apologies, but they don't feel it. That's what criminologists see in Bernardo. Not rage, not madness, but cold cognition. The ability to rehearse emotion without ever experiencing it. One former investigator told CBC News, "He's not angry at the world. He just doesn't recognize it as real." For researchers like Dr. Robert Hare, that emotional vacancy is what makes psychopathy so dangerous. A psychopath won't lose control. They'll calculate it, and sometimes they'll smile doing it. When the headlines fade and the cameras leave the courthouse, the work of understanding evil begins, not in a cell, but in a lab. The RCMP's Behavioural Sciences branch, based in Ottawa, studies the patterns of offenders whose crimes repeat: serial murder, sexual violence, ritualistic behavior. One of the cases that helped shape this field came out of British Columbia in the early 1980s. Clifford Olson. Olson was a drifter, a con man, a self-declared genius who called himself the Beast of British Columbia. He murdered 11 children and teenagers between 1980 and 1981. What horrified investigators wasn't only the brutality, it was the calculation. Olson negotiated with police, demanding $100,000 in exchange for revealing the locations of his victims' bodies. He bragged to journalists from prison. He wrote to victims' families. Decades later, criminologists would call him a textbook manipulator. His case pushed Canadian policing toward formal behavioral analysis and trying to decode the pattern of violence. Out of that came the Violent Crime Linkage Analysis System, built by the RCMP in 1991. It's a national database where investigators input detailed case data, like how the victim was found, the offender's approach, the signature details that repeat across crimes. The idea was simple. A murderer in Calgary might be the same man investigators are hunting in Quebec, if you can connect the details fast enough. Every province feeds into this analysis system. It's not an algorithm, it's human analysis. Detectives and psychologists are comparing behavioral markers to make connections. Dr. Kim Rossmo at Simon Fraser University would later pioneer another tool: geographic profiling. By mapping where crimes occurred, he found patterns that often revealed where an offender lived or worked. The RCMP's Behavioral Sciences branch and Rossmo's methods turned intuition into data, and in doing so, helping police predict where a killer might strike next. In cases like Olson's, the science arrived too late, but every dataset since and every missing person file, every pattern of violence, carries the fingerprints of lessons learned the hard way. The science of evil doesn't stop murders, but it helps investigators understand the people who make them possible. For decades, criminologists pointed to 3 childhood warning signs that might hint at violent futures: fire setting, cruelty to animals, and persistent bedwetting beyond early childhood. Psychologist J.M. MacDonald published the idea in 1963, and the MacDonald triad stuck in pop culture ever since. Modern research now says it isn't proof of destiny, but it's a red flag for childhood trauma. The signs don't cause violence, they show neglect or abuse. But in a few Canadian cases, parts of the triad appear like whispers from the past. Let's go to Montreal, 2012, and Luka Magnotta. Before he murdered Jun Lin and filmed the killing, Magnotta uploaded videos of himself suffocating kittens, acts so horrifying that it triggered international outrage and online amateur investigation. Psychiatrists later told the court he had traits of narcissistic and antisocial personality disorders, not schizophrenia, as his defense claimed. Experts from Montreal's Pine River Institute and University of Ottawa's Criminology department have since cited Magnotta's escalation as a modern example of progression from animal cruelty to interpersonal violence. The psychology is simple. If a person learns early that pain brings power, empathy stops developing. Criminologists warn the triad isn't prophecy, but when one of those fires starts, someone should look closer. It's July 30th, 2008, and a Greyhound bus travels east on the Trans-Canada Highway near Portage-la-Prairie. Passenger Tim McLean sleeps by the window. Without warning, another passenger, named Vince Lee, attacks him in a psychotic episode that shocks the nation. Court psychiatrists later diagnose schizophrenia. Lee hears voices commanding him to kill a force of evil. He is found not criminally responsible under Canada's criminal code. Forensic psychiatrist Dr. Stan Kutcher and others emphasize a critical distinction. Psychosis removes contact with reality. Psychopathy never had it. One is illness, the other, absence. Under Canadian law, not criminally responsible isn't freedom. Offenders enter psychiatric custody under provincial review boards, where treatment and public safety hearings occur yearly. Lee, now Will Baker, spent nearly a decade in supervised care before an absolute discharge in 2017, after doctors and review board members agreed his illness was stable. The National Trajectory Project, Canada's largest study of not criminally responsible cases, later found reoffending rates among this group were far lower than for regular parolees. Neuroscientists at McGill and UBC have since used MRI scans to map differences between psychopathic and psychotic brains. In psychopaths, the amygdala, the fear center, fires weakly. In schizophrenia, it often overfires. The science draws a line where law once blurred it. Criminology doesn't excuse. It explains, and in doing so, gives us an understanding of why the mind breaks, maybe the only way to stop the next one from snapping. In February 2010, investigators enter the Ottawa home of Colonel Russell Williams, the decorated Air Force commander at CFB Trenton. In the basement, they find hundreds of photographs and over 1,000 pieces of women's lingerie, each item cataloged, stored, and labeled. The photos show Williams wearing his victims' clothing, posing in their bedrooms. Prosecutors told the court it was an archive of ownership. Forensic psychologists later described his behavior as a form of trophy-taking, objects kept to relive control. In interviews, retired OPP detective Jim Smith called the collection a diary of dominion. The same need for control played out on the opposite side of the country 8 years earlier at Robert Picton's farm in Port Coquitlam. There, the RCMP recovered personal belongings and human remains of women missing from Vancouver's downtown east side. Picton was convicted of 6 murders, though evidence suggested many more. Psychologists studying his case spoke of instrumental violence, killing not for anger, but for use. Criminology defines this as the ownership principle. A killer reasserts control through objects, places, and repetition. For investigators, those keepsakes become the roadmap of a predator's memory. In both Williams and Picton, trophies were not souvenirs. They were proof the moment still belonged to them. If you ask the RCMP's Behavioral Sciences branch what a profiler actually does, they'll tell you, "We don't solve crimes, we shorten the search." The branch grew out of lessons from Olson and later national programs like the Violent Crime Linkage Analysis System. By the late 1990s, Canada began training behavioral analysts at the Canadian Police College. One graduate, Dr. Kim Rossmo, pioneered geographic profiling while a Vancouver police officer. He noticed that repeat offenders strike in comfort zones, not too near home, not too far away, a ring he called the buffer zone. Mapping those clusters could predict an offender's base of operations. Today, Rossmo's method is standard training material at SFU and the RCMP training program. The Toronto case of Bruce McArthur exposed both the promise and the limits of profiling. Between 2010 and 2017, McArthur murdered 8 men linked to the city's gay village. Investigators eventually used cell tower data and search pattern analysis to connect missing persons files. When officers searched a Leaside property where he worked as a landscaper, they found remains hidden inside planters. A 2019 independent review of that investigation recommended better integration of behavioral analysis and missing persons databases. The report praised the violent crime linkage analysis system and Rossmo-style mapping, but warned that data are only as good as the detail police enter. Profiling in Canada is less about clairvoyance than collaboration. It's math and memory working together, an imperfect mirror held up to the darkness. Every week, millions of Canadians stream true crime stories. Why do people watch true crime stories or listen to true crime podcasts like ours? Psychologists call it fear rehearsal, a way to experience danger and safety. 2024 meta-analysis in the British Journal of Psychology found viewers were driven by curiosity, empathy for victims, and the illusion of control. For some, it's moral reassurance, proof that justice still functions. For others, it's exposure therapy. Our brains release dopamine when fear resolves safely. But criminologists also caution that constant exposure can numb compassion. The University of Ottawa's Dr. Cheryl Reger wrote that repeated narratives of violence risk turning empathy into entertainment. At its best, true crime informs. At its worst, it desensitizes. We listen not because we love evil, but because we're still trying to understand it. And understanding feels safer than ignorance. From Paul Bernardo's smile to Clifford Olson's bargains, from Magnotta's cruelty to Russell Williams' trophies, each case asks the same question: can evil be measured? Criminology gives us instruments, psychopathy checklists, MRI scans, linkage systems, but none can weigh the human soul. Dr. Hare once said that science can describe the darkness, but it can't illuminate conscience. That light has to come from us. Maybe that's why we keep studying killers, not to forgive them, but to remind ourselves what we are not. Before this episode, I didn't realize how much influence Canadian doctors and scientists have had in the development of behavioral science, learning the difference between psychopathy and psychosis, and how they impact the criminal mind.
Just thinking how clinical words like psychopathy or psychosis make everything sound tidy when it isn't.
Exactly. It's easy to forget there are real victims behind the terminology. Bernardo's checklist scores don't mean much to the families who have to sit through his parole hearings.
Still, the psychology matters. It explains why someone like him smiles in court while others collapse under guilt. I kept flashing back to the Halliburtons and that Lucas short-read case. 14 years of hiding that car, same need for control, different emotion driving it.
Yeah, they weren't psychopaths. They were drowning in fear. Guilt has a gravity all its own.
Then there's Jasmine Richardson, 12 years old, plotting with an adult boyfriend. That's not emptiness, that's immaturity mixed with influence. You can't study criminology in Canada without running into that case.
It shows how moral reasoning develops late. The prefrontal cortex that stops impulse just isn't built yet. We punish, but the science says she literally couldn't think like an adult.
And on the other end, you've got the Porta-Peak shooter, Gabriel Wortman, who built a fake RCMP car to look official. That's what behavioral analysts call compensatory control, a total obsession with status.
Same wiring you saw in Russell Williams, just directed differently. He used a uniform and rank to stage control. Wortman built his own. It's frightening how similar the psychology can be.
So after all this research, what's your verdict? Are killers born or made?
Both. Some brains come into the world missing pieces. Some have those pieces taken from them. Criminology's job isn't to excuse either. It's to notice the pattern before it repeats.
That's the hard part, isn't it? Not turning people into monsters so we can stop thinking about them.
Yeah, because once you decide they're not human, you stop looking for the human reasons. And that's when prevention dies.
Guess that's why we keep doing this, not to stare at the darkness, but to map it.
Map it, maybe understand a piece of it.
Just promise me the next one involves less brain dissection.
No promises, but I'll bring the coffee.
Deal. If you want to talk about this episode or share what case you think we should cover next, come find us on X and YouTube at Northern Dark TCC. We read every comment and reply to all of them, so keep them coming.
See you next Monday. Until then, take care of each other.